Hi, everyone. I would like to maybe first introduce myself a little bit before I start my 10-minute presentation. I'm Dr. Natalie Pang. I'm Associate Professor at the Communications and New Media Department at the National University of Singapore. Now, in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to share my thoughts on the topic of AI and how we can pivot our thinking around artificial intelligence to actually be more inclusive. So I'm gonna actually also start by saying that a lot of the ideas here that I'm sharing in this presentation is based on a commentary I have written previously, which I will include as a link in my abstract as well, if you'd like to learn more about what I'm sharing, right? So let me just maybe start with some challenges and potential problems with AI, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with, right? So I think one thing about AI that I like to say is that it's a kind of technology, and quite often technologies are often designed with assumptions. This quite often include people who are able-bodied, have access to a computer, and who are literate as well, right? So the big challenge with AI quite often is associated with gaps that may be invisible, which can drive even greater and deeper gaps for people at the margins. And one thing about AI that I like to highlight, right, is this heavy reliance on training data. A lot of artificial intelligence involves the use of algorithms, which in turn involves and depend heavily on training data. And when such training data actually fail to include populations at the margins, it can actually have many implications that are somewhat problematic. For instance, when certain groups are invisible from the data or are just missing or just underrepresented, right? Their needs, their decisions and behaviors are simply not considered. And this can result in incorrect or irrelevant recommendations and logics that are associated with these individuals from these groups, right? It's not just about underrepresentation or somewhat incomplete training data. Groups may also be overrepresented in training data as well, and that can also produce biases. And yeah, I mean, there are many examples of that already, which I can share in a while, right? I think the other challenge with AI is that there are currently sort of parallel developments in terms of how we think about data and how all of that data is actually going to be governed, right? And there are different regimes that are actually emerging from different areas, different actually regions globally. And I think quite often we can look at actually GDPR actually being one of the most protective kind of governance regimes of especially personal data. But I think it's also important to actually reconsider and think about the extent to which consent is meaningful, right? So in some cases, right, when individuals are completely dependent on certain platforms or certain actually AI tools, they just don't really have much of a say in terms of whether or not they agree with the terms of reference and terms of use. So even as we think about how platforms and also new technologies like AI can be governed, it's also equally important to think about the extent to which such consent or such governance is meaningful for certain populations. And last but not least, I think some of the challenge, right, and potential problem with AI has to do with market logics, right? Given the state of development, technological development today, it quite often is up to individual states as well as platforms to come up with their policies and actually guidelines in terms of how to deal with the harms actually they are emerging on those platforms. And sometimes, right, when these market logics are dominant, right, it actually implies that individuals are left with to deal with the harms that they experience online. Now that I've talked about problems, right, and this is just one example of a problem that can actually result from training data being either incomplete or underrepresented or actually being overrepresented, right? Just one of many examples where, yeah, actually facial recognition kind of algorithms can't tell Black people apart, which is very problematic because it results in false arrests, right? Or actually wrongful accusations that are actually experienced by individuals of particular ethnic groups. Now that I've talked about problems, let me just share 3 key ideas that I have about how we deal with those problems. I think just very quickly, the first is about transparency, about the data that's used to inform and train algorithms. I think secondly, right, I'd like to suggest that we think about data citizenship as integral and very much a part of digital citizenship. And last but not least, actually to encourage everyone, the community, right, to move towards a community-based kind of governance with platform corporativism. Sorry, instead of just letting market logics, right, be the dominant kind of framework in terms of driving how technologies like AI is running. Right. Let me first very quickly talk about training data. Right. This very much has to do with paying more attention about how data about populations is handled and used to drive recommendations. For instance, race should not be a core basis of outputs. Right. When we let that happen, then we are dealing with very problematic decisions and actually outcomes. Right. That actually disparately, right, disadvantage certain population groups. I think very importantly, in thinking about training data, it's also actually essential to include feedback mechanisms so that algorithms have more opportunities to improve and also incorporate greater diversity in their coding logics. And I've included some important questions to ask, right? For instance, does the training data underrepresent or overrepresent particular groups, right? If so, what kind of data is missing, right? And what are we overrepresenting as well? How is sensitive information such as race, income, gender being used? And have the algorithms been tested, right? And for their usefulness and usability, and do the algorithms produce unequal outcomes, right? And last but not least, making these guidelines and practices associated with training data transparent. My second point is really about how we can help citizens understand how data drives various aspects of their lives, be it study, work, entertainment, personal, and social lives. And as I said right earlier, consider the extent to which informed consent is meaningful for many who are highly reliant on certain platforms and tools, AI tools for their livelihoods. Not agreeing to terms and conditions associated with the use of personal data can be very, very costly. So additionally, making sense of lengthy notification letters containing legal clauses can also be very prohibitive, right, and difficult for certain populations. So I think what's missing globally, right, for many individuals is this culture of talking about data collection and use, right, so that they can actually understand the practices associated with data, right? So the idea of data citizenship is really about how we can think about ways to design engagement, citizens' engagement associated with understanding and making decisions about data, right? And this can also be a useful intervention in terms of empowering citizens, including those that are most vulnerable. And I think last but not least, right, is this also this sense of data citizenship also needs to be accompanied by a greater sense of accountability on the part of platforms. Last but not least, right? I like to highlight also this idea of a shift towards platform corporativism, right? It's essentially about how organizations and communities can work together on goods and services that are based on mutually beneficial goals and principles. And this really a key ingredient here is to involve communities in more equitable ways by working with them, right? Not for them, and so on, right? But working with them, right? This is, I think, still a work in progress, but we already have very encouraging examples emerging. I'm just listing two of them. One is Stock C United, which is a platform cooperative that is headquartered in Victoria, British Columbia, right? And it actually it's a platform that provides collections of royalty-free stock photography and videos. And the other example is Fairmont, right, which is a marketplace for ethical goods and services, and it has its origins in Germany. So I believe my time is up, right? With that, I end my presentation, and thank you very much.